See, it's already better than the first one, isn't it? It's faster, it's more interesting, it's got better characters. Arnold is still going around slugging horses and camels like in the first movie, although come to think of it, that's a direct steal from Blazing Saddles, isn't it? Wilt Chamberlain wearing the world's worst wig and 9,000 pounds of wet mastodon fur is still pretty decent in his film debut. This was his film debut, and they hired the veteran Richard Fleischer to direct. John Milius directed the first one, and it was not his kind of thing. As you probably noticed, it was slow and plodding, even though it ended up making $100 million and making the second one possible. But Richard Fleischer, who he must be in his 80s by now, because he was doing theater in New York back in the 30s, but Richard was kind of known as the master of the big-budget adventure film, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Fantastic Voyage and Tora, 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 and one of our favorites around here, Soylent Green. Actually, he was originally one of those film noir guys back in the 50s, you know, the guys who did the gritty black and white realism films. My two favorite Richard Fleischer flicks are The New Centurions, remember that one? And Mandingo. I won't even mention the immortal Amityville 3D. That was a good one, too. Anyway, Richard Fleischer knew exactly what to do with the Conan story, which was to surround Conan with interesting characters and limit his dialogue to 3 words per sequence, basically turn him into a fighting machine. And he also knew it wouldn't hurt to dress up the 14-year-old Olivia Dabo in a nightie with a great bodice on it. Whoa! How did they get away with that, you know? Put that picture on the internet and the FBI child porno squad comes knocking on your door. Whoa, go, roll it. Richard Fleischer, he's good. Richard Fleischer and Arnold, they probably reminisced about their Austrian heritage while making the film, because Arnold had just become an American citizen in 1983 after he grew up in Graz, Austria. And Richard was born in Brooklyn, but his dad was from Vienna. His dad was Max Fleischer of the Dave and Max Fleischer animation team, creators of Popeye and Betty Boop. So it's in his genes, those wacky Austrians. Isn't Grace Jones great? Grace Jones with a burr haircut, jousting and headbutting with Wilt Chamberlain, whose hair is 9 feet long. How good is that? She kind of steals the movie with that wild woman act, you know? The way she got involved in this is that she knew the producer, Dino De Laurentiis. Actually, his daughter, Raffaella De Laurentiis, is the producer of this movie, but she knew him from the 70s when she was doing weird, low-budget movies over in Europe. The last movie she made before Conan the Destroyer was Army of Lovers or Revolt of the Perverts, a German flick made in 1978. Can we get that for the show? Because I want to see that, Revolt of the Perverts. It's in German, though, so maybe I don't. Okay, back to the movie. I have nothing against Germans, but they always have these black and white flashback scenes, you know, where a mime dances on a clown's head with an umbrella in his hand and then slits his throat. You know what I'm talking about? You guys need to get out and see these things, these German, the flashback mime sequence, that's what they call it. They teach it in German film school. Sometimes the flashback sequence has Santa Claus dressed in drag, butchering a pig or something, but they're all artistes over there in Germany. Hey, what was that? God, they're doing it again. That was about a 2-minute segment. Don't you guys have any respect for the hardworking students of Joe Bob Summer School here? The wizard stole Olivia Dabo, and she's going to be the first to do something in 1,000 years, so we want to find out what that is, okay? Good grief. Okay, back to the movie. I think I represent the typical TNT viewer when I say that you should just charge more for the commercials and have less of them, right? You agree? Well, there's going to be a memo Monday morning, Dear Mr. Briggs, and it's going to be signed Vice President Sales and Marketing, and I'm going to be rattling a paper cup in front of Bloomingdale's, but that's okay, because it felt good for about 20 seconds there, so no regrets, right? What happened to Grace Jones? There's very little Grace Jones during this part. Okay, I think it might be helpful at this point to sum up the entire plot of the movie thus far. Starts out with Arnold the Barbarian hacking off 9 or 10 body parts with his 1,000-pound Wilkinson sword machete. Then he decks a horse with a roundhouse right like Alex Karras in Blazing Saddles. And then this British bitch queen comes up and tells Arnold to stop messing around with her guards and go bring back the precious jewel from the sorcerer's palace, because otherwise there's no movie. So Arnold says what's in it for him, and the royal bitch says if Arnold will take her virgin daughter to the jewel, then she'll bring Sandahl Bergman back to life. And Arnold says, really? And then a camel vomits on Arnold, and Arnold has to deck him. And then Conan gets the virgin. He starts off for the Magic Palace with his sidekick, a weenie named Mayalox or something, who looks like Gene Hackman's midget brother. But at the last minute, the bitch queen decides to send Wilt Chamberlain along for the ride. So Wilt puts on a spiked helmet with horns, and the queen tells him as soon as they get the jewel to kill Conan. And then they go riding off through the desert until they find these white-faced zombies roasting a Chinese guy on a spit. And Arnold hacks off a few heads and cuts the Chinese guy loose and tells the guy he needs him for his journey, and the Chinese guy wears a beanie and mutters a lot. And then they go to a town where Grace Jones has her leg chained up and she's fighting off 6 guys with a spear, and the virgin princess sees what's going on. And by the way, Olivia Dabo looks like she got lost on her way to the Celine Dion concert, don't you think? And anyway, Olivia thinks it's not fair. There's 6 guys against 1 girl in chains, so Arnold goes over and cuts Grace Jones loose from the chain, and Grace takes a big stick and starts polling people in their privates. And then Grace decides to join the big party on the way to the palace, and then there's a bunch of plot where they go to the palace and get the jewel and kill the one-eyed magician with gold fingers, and Arnold has to wrestle a giant gorilla man in a red cape who comes out of a mirror house, and then the palace falls to pieces and they get away. And then Wilt starts acting funny, and they get ambushed by some Vikings, and they get all banged up, and Wilt tries to kill Conan, but he has a good explanation, so Conan is too stupid to believe that Wilt is trying to kill him. And that's about it, right? Does that sum it up? Okay, back to the movie. Because people go to the bathroom, see, they miss stuff. I did that as a consumer service. They don't do that on TBS. You know what they do over there? I don't even think they watch the movie at TBS. I can't prove it, but it's not about the movie over there. It's about personal greed and ambition. That's what it's about. I'm sorry, but that's just my own personal opinion. They don't make more money than us, do they? And we beat them in the ratings, right? We do. Wow, a short segment and a lame segment. Olivia Dabo learns how to fight and then asks what sex is. Of course, since 1984, she's learned what sex is, hasn't she? In movies like Greedy and The Last Good Time and Live Nude Girls. This was her first movie ever after training with the London Royal Ballet Theatre. And then she went on to her most famous role as the hippie older sister Karen Arnold on The Wonder Years. The year 1984 was also the year that Arnold Schwarzenegger became a superstar, because this movie came out, and then right after this came The Terminator. Because up till then, he'd struggled well, a little bit, not as much as the normal person when I say struggle, but he'd struggled as a movie actor. For those of you who don't know by now, Arnold grew up in Graz, Austria, the son of the police chief of Graz, who was a stern man. He was a former member of the Nazi Party. So at the age of 15, Arnold rebelled against his dad, because his dad wanted him to be a professional soccer player, but Arnold wanted to be a pro bodybuilder. And then he moved to the United States in 1968, and he went to the University of Wisconsin, and he majored in business and economics, and his bodybuilding career just took off. He was billed as the Austrian Oak, and he won Mr. World, Mr. Universe 5 times, and Mr. Olympia 7 times. And ironically, he's so rich today that he owns both the Mr. Universe and the Mr. Olympia pageants. So anyway, he retired undefeated in 1980, and during all those years, he was trying to get into the movies. Now, he made Hercules in New York in 1970 under the name Arnold Strong, but it was so bad it was never released until 1983, and they dubbed his voice. But then he was in Bob Rafelson's Stay Hungry as a bodybuilder, and he first really came to prominence in Pumping Iron in 1977, one of the greatest documentaries ever made. Love that movie, but he really didn't need the money by that time, because he had invested all his bodybuilding winnings and the revenues he got from his mail-order real estate business, and he was already a millionaire by the time he became an American citizen in 1983. And then he married Maria Shriver, and up until 1993, he held the distinction of being the only major movie star who had never had a flop. Unfortunately, 1993 is the year he released The Last Action Hero. So, still a pretty remarkable story. Okay, let's get back to the picture. That's still his only flop, right? Well, Junior. May Junior. But that one and Junior. Well, there's Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin. Hey, the man's 52 years old. He's eventually going to screw up, okay?
Wait! It's worth a fortune!
Way too much plot getting in the way of the story here. We got jewels, we got magic horns, we got wizards, we got curses and prophecies. You know, if you read the original Conan books, the stories are kind of simple. It's too bad, but even in the best Conan movies, they don't really achieve what the books did. Because Robert E. Howard wrote 12 Conan novels back in the 30s, and Robert was a Texas good old boy, lived out in Cross Plains, Texas, in the area of West Texas we call the Cross Timbers, middle of gall dang nowhere is where that is. Land of the scrub oak and the mesquite, and he never traveled farther than Fort Worth his whole life. He would go to Fort Worth for boxing matches, but that was the only traveling he ever did. And he liked guns, and he liked writing stories, and he hated snakes, which when you live in West Texas, you deal with rattlesnakes all the time. You notice how there's always a deadly snake scene in every Conan story? So anyway, Robert E. Howard never made much money, never got married, just lived with his mother in a little frame house, and he sent stories off to the pulp magazines in New York. He wrote detective stories, wrote poetry, wrote Western stories, but the most original thing he created were these barbarian stories. And then in 1936, his mother died, and he just couldn't deal with it. So he typed a few lines on his typewriter, and he got out his pistol, and he went out to the car, and he committed suicide. And they buried him next to his mother, and he was 30 years old. And when the local newspaper reporter went in the house, he found a sheet of paper that was still there in the typewriter, and he pulled it out because it was Robert E. Howard's last words. And it was a poem, and it said, "All fled, all done, so lift me on the pyre. The feast is over, the lamps expire." Okay, back to the movie. What? They love it when I tell gloomy stories. You like that, didn't you? You know, you can go to the main cemetery there in Brownwood and see Robert E. Howard's grave. And when he was alive, nobody really even knew he was a writer. You know, nobody paid any attention to him. Now they have Robert E. Howard festivals out there in Brownwood and Cross Plains. You ever been to Cross Plains? Anybody ever been to Cross Plains? Whoa, you take the worst desert they show in this movie, it's worse. Not a very pretty part of Texas. Looks like a giant fell on it and mashed all the trees down into mush.